This history is not your fault, but it absolutely is your responsibility. What happened, what has been done is not your fault, but where we find ourselves here together, whether we're Indigenous people, whether we're settler people, whether we're somewhere in between, this is work that we need to pick up. We need to have the courage to look at our past. We need to have the courage to look at where we are now, and we need to work together to figure out how we can collectively heal moving forward.
China's Mao Zedong and Richard Nixon forge a new era with one handshake. Their hour-long discussion was a leap into the unknown after decades of hostility.
1.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Scientists believe it's human activity that's driving the temperatures up, a process known as global warming. Ever since the Industrial Revolution began, factories, power plants, and eventually cars have burned fossil fuels such as oil and coal, releasing huge amounts of carbon dioxide and other gases into the atmosphere. These greenhouse gases trap heat near
You may have heard the term self-fulfilling prophecy before, and in fact someone may have used that term without even knowing about the psychology behind it. But really, when psychologists talk about self-fulfilling prophecy, it's a way in which a schema has a huge impact on outcomes for a couple of reasons. The key behind self-fulfilling prophecy is that a schema that a person has for another person influences their expectations of that person, which then in turn influence the actual outcomes the person displays. That all sounds very theoretical and abstract. Let's give a concrete example. An early instance of self-fulfilling prophecy is what some people call the Pygmalion effect. There was a study done in the 60s in which school teachers were given the roster of kids that they were going to have in their upcoming school year, but the manipulation was that at random, some of the kids on their roster were marked gifted, and some of them were not marked gifted. This had nothing to do with the students themselves. It was totally at random who was marked gifted versus not. But the teachers were led to believe that some panel of experts had designated some students as being especially likely to do well than others. Now, the schema that a teacher would have about a gifted student lets them expect various things from the students who are marked gifted. So the schema now that comes to mind is that of accomplishing good things in class, being attentive, doing extra work, working really hard. Those are what's associated with the schema of a gifted student, which leads those teachers to expect that the students marked gifted will do well in their class. Now, here's where self-fulfilling prophecy kicks in. Because at the end of the school year, when you look at the actual test scores of the students in this experiment, the kids who had been randomly marked gifted at the beginning of the year got better scores at the end of the year than kids who hadn't been marked gifted. How could this be? It was totally random. Those kids weren't actually more gifted objectively than the other students. So how could this have happened? Well, the answer lies in the fact that the teachers would have ended up treating the gifted students differently than the non-gifted students. Because they expected the group marked gifted to do better, they would give them more opportunities, more chances to succeed, because they expected from their schema that they would end up doing better anyway. So they changed their own behavior toward them based on their expectations. And what happens when you give people more opportunity to succeed? They're then more likely to succeed as a consequence. So half the kids were randomly given more attention during the school year because of a schema these teachers had about gifted students that didn't even apply to those kids. And then those kids ended up doing better because they had more opportunities.
Never fully trust again. And that I call the narrative of trauma, because it's as if it is a breach in the relationship of trust that two people have together. And then when the separation arrives, you refer to those events as the events that announce and foretell already what will be. But again, these are retrospective accounts. We don't know for sure that this is actually the reasons, but these are retrospective accounts.
So es ist ja meistens im Leben, oder, dass wir uns Sachen im Nachhinein irgendwie zurechtlegen. Gerade die Brüche im Leben versuchen wir oft mit einer eigenen Geschichte uns dann so zu erzählen, dass es für uns irgendwie auch Sinn macht, weil wir ja nicht kopflos durchs Leben gehen wollen, sondern uns selber irgendwie auch verstehen in dem, was wir tun.
From phenomenology, but slightly different, is from Heidegger. Negative for me is what happens when what you normally do breaks down. And so when something breaks down, you're compelled to suddenly pay attention to what it is that you're doing, even if a second ago it was completely routine and you did not think about doing it. But for Heidegger, this is, if you want, a creative moment. It's an eruption. It's a moment where things break down and they force us. The world compels us to pay attention to it. Mm-hmm. That's what also I mean by negative. It's this breaking down. And relationships, now we know, can break down at any moment, whether we are in them or before we enter them. And that's why they compel us to pay attention to them. That's what psychology in a way does. I mean, clinical psychology, and it compels us to pay attention to the lurking and constant danger of relationships breaking down, or relationships that have already broken down and which we try to understand because they have broken down. So these are the two meanings of negative I use in the book. And as you rightly suggested, one of the main claims of the book is that the very same forces that make it very difficult to enter relationships are the same forces that are operative when people have long-standing relationships and these relationships come apart and crumble. This is exactly the stake of the book. It is to show that it is the same set of forces that are operative in both cases.
Love. Love in the good old-fashioned sense, which is today more and more rare. Love as an encounter. This is why in English and also in some other languages, not all, like French, you use the term fall. We fall in love. This is the eventual dimension. In what sense? Let's say you live a happy life. You are lucky, you have a job, you meet regularly with friends, you are not in love, you just make one-night stands, maybe here and there, you meet every evening with friends, you drink, you go to blah, blah. Then all of a sudden, in a totally contingent way, let's say you stumble on the street, somebody helps you to stand up, it's a young girl or boy, blah, blah, and of course, it's the love of your life. A totally contingent encounter, but the result can be that your whole life changes. Nothing is the same, as they say. You even spontaneously perceive your entire past life as leading towards this unique moment. You know, the illusion of love is, oh my God, I was waiting all my life for you. This, something like this would have been the love event. And I think it's getting more and more rare today. Many intelligent cultural critics noticed how we are almost returning to pre-romantic, pre-modern times when marriage or love connections were a matter of relatives, counselors, and so on. Your uncle, your aunt, they selected whom you will marry, and so on. Today, it's similar, only instead of all those old wise uncles and so on, it's dating agencies, marriage agencies, and so on and so on. What they offer us is precisely love without the fall, without falling in love, without this totally unpredictable traumatic encounter. And that's what I find very sad. I think that today we are simply more and more afraid of these eventual encounters. You encounter something which is totally contingent, but the result of it, if you accept it as an event, is that your entire life changes. It's a different story. This is why I think that this avoiding falling in love is the same phenomenon as a standard joke that I use in almost all my books. You know how we want to date the thing without the bad aspect of it, without the price we have to pay for it. We want, I don't know, we want sugar without calories, so we have sweeteners. We want beer without alcohol. We want, and so on and so on. And I claim it's the same thing in sexuality. We want brief, safe sex, sexual encounters without the fall, without this fatal attachment. And I think this is the most sad thing here, that even what is slowly emerging as maybe the predominant ideology today, what I ironically refer to as Western Buddhism. Life is just a play of appearances, don't take it too seriously, maintain a proper distance, don't get too attached to worldly objects. It fits perfectly this superficial consumerist attitude. So again, events are rare. An event is a traumatic encounter which, to put it in more learned philosophical terms, retroactively creates its own causes.
Let's imagine that the food industry 50 years ago posed a hypothesis. And that hypothesis is illustrated on this slide right here, that processed food is better than real food. That's what they said 50 years ago. And they said it for a whole bunch of different reasons, and we understand what those reasons are. And we've adopted a lot of those reasons, and we've sort of inculcated those into our daily lives. Now, what are the outcomes that you have to look at to determine whether or not this hypothesis is correct? Well, you have to look at consumption. Did consumption go up? Yes or no? Did health improve? Yes or no? Did the environment get better or worse? And finally, cash flow. Did companies make money? Did consumers save money? And did society do well or not? These are the questions that ultimately will determine the success or failure of this experiment. Everybody got it? So that's what we're going to analyze today, because the food industry refuses to. So we're going to do it for them. Got it? Okay. So here's the experiment. 1965. Everybody remember these? Okay, Swanson TV dinners. The first ultra-processed, marketed fast food. Processed food, and it was in everybody's home. And they told us that this was going to liberate women from the kitchen. Now, has it? Yeah, it sort of has. And that's one of the reasons why we have two-parent working families now and nobody to shuttle your kids and all the daycare and everything else. In fact, it did liberate women from the kitchen, because if we didn't have those, they probably still would be in the kitchen. Whether that's a good thing or not is up to your own decision-making. And Spam, everybody remember Spam, right? Okay. So that was 50 years ago. Okay? This is what we have now. And everybody recognizes all of these. Okay? So the processed food industry has certainly advanced and evolved over the past 50 years to provide us with all of this fare, which we are now consuming. But what's interesting is, with all of the different processed food that's out there for us to be able to choose from today, how many companies do you think make those?
I was shocked by this statement, we all know about it, of American Psychological Association, which declared toxic masculinity an illness. First, are we aware what they did? 5 decades ago, it was homosexuality, which was medicalized. Now they take masculinity, aggressive, clear social ideological product, and they medicalize it. And it's wonderful, because friends told me, who are part of this process, you know, big companies, oh, they're already preparing pills against toxic masculinity.
But I want to tell you right up front where I stand on this. These guidelines are ideologically driven, and they're dangerous. Let's start with Exhibit A. The article in the Monitor starts off by talking about how men are overly privileged and we're violent and we're overly represented in positions of power, and we are the beneficiaries of this conspiracy called patriarchy, which is never defined. And yes, we may face some hardships, but it's our own damn fault. And as you read into the article, there's this one line that has gotten a lot of attention on social media, and I want to read it to you. The main thrust of the subsequent research is that traditional masculinity, marked by stoicism, competitiveness, dominance, and aggression, is on the whole harmful. How do you even begin to deconstruct that level of prejudice, and especially when they tell you that everything that follows is going to prop up this prejudice? It's a ridiculous statement to say that these qualities, which by the way are just qualities, they have upsides and they have downsides, to say that they're harmful on the whole is just absurd.
I'm becoming afraid of my hatred for men. It started as a fun little, you know those TikToks where people are like, don't make jokes about having kinks because your brain doesn't know you're joking, and it actually develops them. I think I joked way too much about hating men, and now I am genuinely, in a sexist way, I hate them. Like, in a way that a white man from Alabama hates black people. I hate men. I walk past them and I want to kill them, and they aren't even doing anything. I just see them and it fills me with rage. I don't know how to stop. It's gone way too far. It consumes me.
People confuse the two, and this is the ways or the reasons why often conservative people criticize contemporary society or liberal norms or freedom, because they do observe that this increased freedom does not lead to a greater happiness. But I think we need to make a choice, and we have made it collectively. Namely, if we prefer to be more happy or more free. I think we collectively prefer to be happy, prefer to be free, more free. Collectively prefer to be happy, prefer to be free, more free.
Prefer communism or capitalism?
Communism. Yeah.
Do you live here?
Yeah.
Why?
Because we're here to learn.
Oh, you're studying?
Yeah, studying.
So you're going to go back after?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, so you prefer communism?
Yeah.
And you don't think that the government in China does anything wrong?
No.
No wrong.
No wrong at all.
So putting people in jail for practicing religion is okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay. Freedom of speech, stopping people from protesting, it's okay?
Yes.
Collectively prefer to be happy, prefer to be free, more free. Even if it brings less, I wouldn't say happiness, but less well-being. I don't think we are well equipped as individuals to live on our own, to live outside strong communities. But I think communities have not proven themselves. I think most of the time communities have oppressed women. Communities don't like strangers. They don't. So the price to be paid, in my opinion, for freedom is more morality, that is more equality between men and women, and more equality between members of a community and strangers to the community.
This is the evidence. You want me to make an act of faith, risking myself, my wife, my woman, my sister, my children, on some idealism which you assure me exists in America, which I have never seen.
That's why I don't like Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale, and especially the TV version, the TV series. I think it's the best example of what my good friend Fred Jameson called nostalgia for the present.
You know, any political movement, at any sort of moment has a kind of view of what its issues are and what it must do and has to engage in something and in doing something. Feminism, for instance, might have a particular sense of, at any given moment, of who women are, or what issues of injustice face that need to be addressed, and it must, in a sense, do that. Do something. It must be something. It must pursue something. Make a judgment about a situation, and in a sense, it must also question those judgments. It may at a later point in the story find itself answerable to other claims about it that it is unjust. So for instance, feminism has always found itself answerable to critics about it. Critics saying about it that it has advanced a particular notion of woman that is exclusive or exclusionary, that it has, enacted a kind of gesture on behalf of justice that is in fact unjust from the point of view of a different kind of view or a different perspective. And And good. It should be accountable in that way, but it also, can't resist answering the question, what is just, and pursuing the issue of just action and just decision.
Hey, you're not allowed to sit on my white chair.
Okay. Do you all believe as a race, I'm not talking about you specifically, but do you believe as a race, African Americans, we play the victim?
Hey, man.
Well, I mean, I'm gonna be real. I'm gonna say yes.
Let's go.
I'm gonna be real. I'm gonna say yes.
Give me an example.
See, it's a loaded question just because I'm not gonna sit here and say every single African American side's either on the yes side or on the no side.
Mm-hmm.
I say yes to mainly spark conversation, but also I know you said not personal experiences, but that's all I got to go on. I will say, just based on where I am in life, I've gotten a lot of pressure from African Americans, feeling like, I've gotten to where I am because of white people, or you can't speak, you didn't grow up like I did. Like I came from the hood, I didn't have the same opportunities and privileges that other people had. And though, I believe that to be true, in today's America, I really do feel like anybody has the opportunity to rise to the occasion. Now, is it easier for certain people over others? Yeah, I mean, let's be real, yes. Like, that's 100% true. But, I just keep hearing, like, systemic oppression, this, that, and the third. Like, yeah, we get it, I know. Like, we all know. But the opportunities are still there. Will you have to work a little bit harder to get to where you want to be? Absolutely. Because of how you look? Absolutely. I'm a testament of it.
Anybody gonna say nothing?
Go ahead. I want to hear this.
I think it's impossible to accuse us of playing the victim. You're talking about a 400+ year head start for a particular set of people. You're talking about systematic oppression. That's what I meant by a post-traumatic state. Is we're at this stage in 2020. We're trained to say, yeah, it's unequal, and that's just not okay to me. I don't think we should ever get to the place where we just accept inequality.
Correct.
I'm not encouraging stagnation, so I agree with you. I'm not encouraging throwing in the towel like, yo, it's not fair. That's not what I'm saying at all. But while striving to be your best self, you should never accept inequality. And I think that's what we're being trained. And
feel they should be proud of her because she's a woman. Why? I wrote about Gillard recently, and the article appeared on the ABC's The Drum website, and what was striking was that the comments were so defensive, with none of them honest enough to acknowledge the power game women have been drawn into, a game of consumerism and glass ceilings that has nothing to do with liberation or feminism, a game that divides gender from class. For the truth is that what matters to those who wish to control our lives is not the gender we're born with, but the class we serve. The same truth applies to those from racial minorities who are co-opted and rewarded. Like gender, race without a sense of class is almost meaningless. When Barack Obama began his run for the White House, I wrote that he was merely a familiar servant of a system of corrupt power. The reaction was instructive. At a meeting of anarchists in London, yes, anarchists, I was assailed for even suggesting that the elevation of this black man was anything but a cause for celebration. It reminded me of a reaction to my interview with Nelson Mandela, in which I asked Mandela why he and the ANC had broken their sacred promise not to privatize. How could you embarrass him like that? Someone said to me. I used to write a regular column for Il Manifesto, the Italian paper of the left. In 2008, my column was dropped when I warned that Barack Obama would continue the policies of the Bush years. As we now know, the tears that were shed on election night in 2008 were really tears of blood. Obama is as violent as George Bush ever was. And in some ways, he's worse. He's sent more drones against ordinary people than any president. He's prosecuted more whistleblowers, truth-tellers, than any president. He's overseen the greatest incarceration of black people in American history. His greatest achievement has been to seduce and silence the American anti-war movement. In Aboriginal Australia, we have our Barack Obamas. They're given generous space in the pages of the Murdoch press and on the screens of the ABC. When the Australian Federal Police rioted in Canberra on 26th of January, these Australian Obamas were on hand to reassure good white folks that the blackfellas had got out of hand yet again, and were ungrateful yet again, and would be put in their place yet again. Sexual politics have come to dominate much of the debate on the left in Western countries.
You own almost all the infrastructure of society, the economy, the military, the culture. I'm talking now about men. It is almost impossible to really change the structure of domination. So let's not forget that despite the considerable gains and advances that women have made, and they have made these advances only thanks to feminists who struggled for them, for all of women. Despite this, most of the social infrastructure in politics, the military, and the economics, and religion, and the courts has remained in the hands of men. If that is the case, I think even when you put out there an emancipatory ideology, an emancipatory idea, it is very easily recuperated by forces that are more powerful than you. This is what happened, I think, to the idea of sexual freedom, for example. Feminism has been hijacked by capitalist industries.
Right? We negotiate who takes the trash out, who goes to work, who's the breadwinner, who drives the kids to school. You know, we're getting better on the whole at negotiating labor, household labor, but we're still not having conversations about the emotional toll. So I think the first thing we can do is start talking about it, right? We can start talking about, hey, I know that it's my job to make dinner, but can I tell you about all of the ways in which that stresses me out emotionally? One example I hear a lot in my practice are couples who come in, they think they're doing a great job managing division of labor. Just the other day I had a client say, you know, my husband offered to make dinner 3 nights a week, and I felt so great about that. I thought it was gonna make a huge difference. But actually, it feels worse because I'm still having to figure out what he's going to make for dinner, write the grocery list, do the grocery shopping, remind him that it's his night to make dinner. So sure, he's making dinner, but I still feel emotionally like I'm responsible for making sure that everything gets done.
Yes.
That's a harder conversation to have.
It is a very difficult one to have because how do you not do this without sounding like you're complaining?
Well, exactly. And there was an article that went viral a couple of years ago, and the title was something like, "Women aren't nags, we're just fed up."
What does it really mean? I think it means that we put on our game face. A lot of times when we come to work, maybe we're not feeling so great. Maybe you got a hangover, you're cold, or maybe you got a speeding ticket on the way into work in the morning, or maybe you got some bad news from your kid's school, or got into an argument with a family member. Whatever. These things happen. That's part of life. But what we want to do is when we get to the office, we put on our game face, we leave that stuff at the door, and we create a positive and uplifting experience. We create a positive attitude in ourselves that we share with our colleagues at work. We don't bring the bad stuff into the office. Now, here's a case in point. On screen right now, you're seeing a picture of a couple of servers. And have you ever been to a restaurant where the waiter or the waitress comes up to the table and way over discloses, tells you things that you simply don't need to know about their personal life, and maybe what ends up happening is it's a bunch of negative stuff about an ex-husband or an ex-wife or a boyfriend or girlfriend or something like that, and it casts a pall over the entire experience. And I'm thinking, gosh, I just came in, I just wanted to have lunch and wanted to have a good experience, and suddenly I'm your therapist. And as one human to another, certainly we can understand and we feel sorry for them, but that's not our role.
Captain, I have a message. This attack is called off. You have to stop. You have to stop. Where is Colonel Mackenzie? Where is Mackenzie?
But also, what capitalism has changed is that men and women, heterosexuals, now meet each other as if on a market. It has marketized heterosexual relationships. That is, a market is governed by the law of supply and demand.
And the truth is that sexual assault is but a symptom of the problem. The problem is the mindset of how these young men are being programmed to think about, to talk about, and to treat women.
So many of the few liberated black men are gay because they have given themselves permission to be emotionally aware and emotionally intelligent. And that has yet to happen in any kind of movement of straight black men.
This is just the reality of it. So women, you know, we're more educated now, and I think that we're furthering our education. So with that being said, we're gonna hold off on the baby making. We're gonna hold off until we get that great job, really career driven. And I don't think there's anything wrong with hoping that there's someone either on your level or higher than you.
So, okay.
Go ahead, doctor.
All right. So before, right, it was okay when the man made more money to be the one to buy everything, to do, you know, treat you and all this other kind of stuff. And now that you make more money, you can't be that one, right? You can't be the one to pay for the meal, and because you're dating down.
I hate that, yeah.
What is that about? It wasn't called dating down.
Right.
Yeah.
When men were the breadwinners and all that kind of. It's called
taking care
now
of your
it's
family.
dating down.
Yeah.
What is that?
I have a feeling, though, that some of the issue here is that it may be the psyche of the men, that when they make less, they are insecure, and it can affect their relationship.
This report is about the women complaining about the fact that
they don't
now
have,
I got to get
so
a guy
yeah, it could be.
than me.
So are these women expecting the men to cover everything? They want those breadwinners, so they.
That's what it sounds like to me by this particular study. I have to date down now. What is that? You wanted to make more money, you make more money. What's the if there is a responsibility with making more money? First of all, I don't believe in any of it. But if there's a responsibility that comes with making more money, accept it. You wanted to make more money. Right. You know, are you going to find many men out there that makes as much as you do?
And my point is, so now you're going to, because we hear so much about women that are like, oh, there's nobody out there, there's no one out there, I can't find love, I'm getting too old. Now you're going to sacrifice the fact that you could find that love because the man's not making that much money, and you're going to date down?
All right.
No,
They're wrapping us. I have a feeling this is going to be our morning rush extra.
I
We
can
have
do
a
bad by
lot
myself.
left to say.
Yo, that black girl was so salty.
She was so salty
she
that
was
her
so salty,
her
bro.
whole argument just got trashed.
You gotta make the money first. Then when you get the money, you get the power. Then when you get the power, then you get the woman.
The biggest challenge, and I generally find this at sort of the $10 million sales rule, many people have to change in going from 10 to 25 million in sales. It's the natural Darwinian forces of business. And if you don't have the balls to make those cuts and you can't deal with it, you're the wrong leader.
In other words, the skills that it takes to go from 0 to 10 million are very different from the skills it takes to go from 10 million to 25, from 25 to...
Oh, I can't tell the story.
Yeah, you can.
Oh, shit. His son's telling him to tell the story. You got a story? Well...
He's got the worst story
ever. Yeah, it's pretty bad.
I mean,
I'm gonna be honest. You're on the #1 podcast. I don't know if you guys in the are. world. How That's old true. are you guys now? I'm fucking. You gotta be over 30. I think. I am 34. We got one. 34. So.
Now you're full of shit. Sit down. I'm gonna answer you. I'm gonna answer you. Shut up and sit down.
No way.
Sit down.
No, I want to finish my question.
I'm gonna answer global warming.
Right,
finish the question. Answer.
It's changing on Earth, and it's changing with CO2. What do you people with the money, what are you doing about this? Because
I'll tell you right now.
No, I've got children. I've got 20 21, 23-year-old children. And what's their future with you people with money? You talk about money all of the time.
Okay, sit down, please. Sit down, please. In the front row. Excuse me.
Did you see it on the competitive list? Now wake up, meatheads. I put that fucking chart up there for a reason. Wake up! Because I'm like an Olympic coach. You want to get a gold medal, sweetheart? And you can't call girls sweetheart anymore. Hey, Blondie, big ass, big tits. You want to get a goddamn gold medal? You do this.
Meanwhile, in China, where the coronavirus originated, a top advisor to the Chinese government declared that the country was experiencing a very different kind of and more profound threat. The problem, he said, was a national masculinity crisis. Chinese boys, quote, have been spoiled by housewives and female teachers, and they were becoming, as a result, quote, delicate, timid, and effeminate. In essence, they were becoming people who might listen to someone like Tony Fauci. Left unchecked, said the Chinese government advisor, the feminization of Chinese boys would, quote, inevitably endanger the survival and development of the Chinese nation. In January, China's government acted on this recommendation. The Education Ministry of China released a notice entitled Proposal to Prevent the Feminization of Male Adolescents. The goal was to, quote, cultivate students' masculinity. Have you seen this on other channels? By the way, kind of interesting, isn't it? China won't explain the reasoning behind this plan, but there are some clues. Last year, we learned that China has quickly developed the world's largest naval force. In 2015, China had 255 battle force ships. Now they have more than 360. And many of those ships are more capable than anything in the American naval fleet. So how are we responding to this? Well, at the White House yesterday, Joe Biden addressed it effectively. What's the American military's response? Here's what Joe Biden said.
Some of it's relatively straightforward work, where we're making good progress designing body armor that fits women properly, tailoring combat uniforms for women, creating maternity flight suits, updating requirements for their hairstyles. And some of it is going to take an intensity of purpose and mission to really change the culture and habits that cause women to leave the military.
So we've got new hairstyles and maternity flight suits. Pregnant women are going to fight our wars. It's a mockery of the U.S. military. While China's military becomes more masculine as it's assembled the world's largest navy, our military needs to become, as Joe Biden says, more feminine. Whatever feminine means anymore, since many women no longer exist. The bottom line is, it's out of control, and the Pentagon's going along with this. Again, this is a mockery of the U.S. military and its core mission, which is winning wars.
If anyone should love America, it's Ilhan Omar. This country rescued her from a squalid Kenyan refugee camp and made her a national figure, quite an ascent. But Ilhan Omar is not grateful. She hates us for it. Watch Omar tell us it is time to dismantle our country.
As long as our economy and political systems prioritize profit without considering who is profiting, who is being shut out, we will perpetuate this inequality. So we cannot stop at criminal justice system. We must begin the work of dismantling the whole system of oppression wherever we find it.
Dismantle the American economy and the American system of government, institutions that generations of Americans built over hundreds of years.
All right, there is already enough there in the sneering condescension that Ilhan Omar should be quietly grateful her entire life because she was granted asylum when she was a child. But let's just consider the vast distance between what you just heard her say and what he seemed to hear. Because according to Tucker, dismantling the system of oppression means dismantling the entire American economy and system of government. Now, did he inadvertently make a nuanced point about how systemic oppression is definitionally baked into every level and facet of that very same system? Yeah, yes he did. Am I going to give him credit for doing that? Fuck no.
Summers praises Gillard for ending, and I quote, the cultural taboos that have kept women from combat roles in the military. In other words, Gillard's feminist distinction is that she has removed gender discrimination in combat units of the Australian Army. Thanks to her, women are now liberated to kill Afghans and others who offer no threat to Australia, just like their male colleagues, including those currently accused of killing civilians. So yes, that's another glass ceiling smashed. The right to kill, the right to engage in perpetual war, the so-called strategy dreamt up by the American General David Petraeus, now the director of the CIA, who personally briefed Gillard and whom she is said to admire. The first female Prime Minister of Australia is one of the most militaristic leaders this country has ever had, constantly promoting the Edwardian myth that the blood of war maketh young men, and now women.
Fuck no.
This is part of their Equal Opportunities to Be Evil series.
I'm Marilyn Hewson, Chairman, President, and CEO of Lockheed Martin. I had various babysitting jobs starting at about age 11, but...
Which made me want to bomb people.
It made me want to kill children early.
And then I grew up to make a bomb that was dropped on children.
I am done with children.
Oh, life comes full circle, doesn't it? I mean, or death.
By age 16, I had a full-time job at the Dairy Queen. So I'd go to work at 4 in the afternoon after school and work till midnight, 40 hours a week. And I was promoted to the night manager for $1.25 an hour, which meant I managed the rest of the teenagers and I put the money away at night. When I finished high school and was looking at an opportunity to go into college, the way I selected the position I went into is I
was thinking, where could I do the most damage? What could be the most explosive? All right, I don't want to make fun of her anymore. But anyway, stay tuned.
Jimmy, hold on. Warmongers, they're just like us. They like ice cream.
Yeah.
And they babysit. And
that
then
is what
a
this
war
is.
contractor came into Dairy Queen and said, "How would you like to create weapons?" Golly, yes. Fuck this. I'm tired of working hard.
We need some diversity in our war profiteering.
So, I don't work as a doctor anymore. For the last 3 or 4 years, I've just been too busy traveling and speaking and doing this kind of work. But I was the family practice consultant to the psychiatric service at St. Paul's Hospital in Vancouver. So I looked after the medical needs of people hospitalized for psychiatric mental illness. And sometimes people are brought in, in straitjackets and forcibly by the police. And they're put into these rubber rooms. And when a doctor goes in to interview these people who are violent, then we're always advised to have hospital security personnel with us. These big burly people that can restrain somebody in case they should act out. And I always said, I don't want any security people with me, just let me in there. And I found that if I go in there with no fear, with no suspicion of the intentions of that individual, if I just went in there, just willing to see them as human beings, there was never any violence, there was never any problem. Not once did I feel myself in any danger whatsoever. Not once did I perceive myself as being threatened by anybody, and there was never a single incident. But if I went in there with 2 burly guys ready to jump, I know I'd be creating a problem. So this is before I even spoke a word. So what I'm saying is that the people you work with, who are very volatile people, who carry a lot of trauma and a lot of suppressed and charged emotion, it's not so much what you do, but how you present yourself that makes a huge difference to how they're going to react and what they're going to do. And that means that the first person you have to come to terms with before you interact with these people is not them, but you. So what's going on inside here? What do I carry?
Ever experienced a man being creepy to you before?
Most definitely. Yeah, sometimes they just awkwardly stare, or sometimes they just think that they can pick you up on the street or whatever. You think just not that they can't come over and talk to you, but they feel that they have the right to if you give them a signal or whatever. They think that we're being cold because of something, but no, you're just making us cold towards you because we're not uncomfortable.
So women don't like it when men stare at them, when they approach them. Creepy men make them uncomfortable. But here's the interesting question. Are these behaviors actually creepy? Is he actually doing anything wrong? Or is he just not attractive? Would women still find this behavior creepy and it would make them uncomfortable if he was handsome? Let's find out.
If a man is rich, successfully looking at women, likely to consider him creepy still.
That's just no, I would it's less likely, yeah. It depends on who it is, because if there's someone on the road and, dressed inappropriately and then, just disgusting, and you your number, you're like, oh, I'm gonna do that. Someone that's really cute comes out with nice clothes, nice watch, you're like, hey, yeah, sure.
I've seen guys speak to women with this much respect, and I deplore that. My mother is just totally, I grew up, my mother raised me, so I have this much respect for women, and I fight often because of that. And it gives me a lot of friends. I mean, I get a lot of friends, but I get a lot of friends because I have respect for women, ultra respect for women. But then, I was liking this girl in Tam, and I'm extra nice, extra gentleman. I'm extra just like, oh, you're beautiful and you deserve the best. And she told me I was too nice. I couldn't believe it. It wouldn't work because I was too nice. That was the ultimate stab in the back. So I went through a week of just going, forget it, I'm just gonna be like them. Because they seem to get the girls and they call girls the B word.
Eventually.
Bitches ain't shit. We don't love them hoes, and it's like that. I feel as though it really ain't as big as everybody make it, Even the females know it's bitches. Females don't even hang with females, you know what I'm saying? So why would they expect a nigga to understand something they don't understand? You know what I'm saying? That's one. Two is that these bitches is like boss. She out there handling her business. She ain't saying, why you call me bitch? She clowning, and that's what you do. That's how you show and prove. Bet no nigga gonna fuck with her. If you call yourself a bitch, who can call you a bitch? Niggas need to stop giving these bitches all the attention. That's why niggas is dying now. When these hoes get horny, niggas die. Hoes get horny, niggas die. Watch, every time. Every funeral you go to, it's a bitch that was horny the night before. So you need to start checking these bitches, keep your dick in. Niggas need to go back to the OG penitentiary days and start jacking off. Because if you don't, you're going to end up killing each other. We're going to all die.
We gotta start saying, fuck these bitches, man. If you fucking with a cool female, that's all good. But if you fucking with a bitch, you need to break her ass and shake her ass.
We actually have no consistent definition of Stockholm Syndrome, and there are many researchers who believe it doesn't exist at all. So there's a lot of controversial elements when it comes to this syndrome. When it was discovered that she was Elizabeth Smart, she was the person who was kidnapped, and the police intervened, she asked what was going to happen to her captors. She asked if they were going to be in trouble. And she was told by the officers that the captors would go to prison, and she started to cry, and actually cried all the way to the police station. So these are kind of examples of Stockholm Syndrome.
When we broke up, I asked myself the question of, what are you grieving the most? And what I grieved the most was that I didn't have a plan.
Do you feel like you have unlimited options?
That's the word. It's honestly, that is the problem. When you're okay on your own, you don't really need someone to depend on necessarily. And so it makes you so much more discerning about who you spend your time with. And I know for all of us, our time is our resource.
I 100% agree with that. I think having just moved here a year and a half ago and restarting kind of my whole identity, my career now, I feel like I'm dating employers, going freelance. Then add on top of that all of these beautiful men. Sometimes not all beautiful, but fine. But there's like 4 different dating apps. There's so many options that it's just where I'm spending my time and with who affects all of that.
It's as if we somewhere recognize that there might, rather strangely, be some quite good, though uncomfortable reasons why making it difficult to split up a union can be an advantage for its members. The marshmallow test was a celebrated experiment in the history of psychology, designed to measure children's ability to delay gratification and track the consequences of being able to think long-term. Some 3-year-old children were offered a marshmallow, but told they would get 2 if they held off from eating the first one for 5 minutes. It turned out a lot of children just couldn't make it through this period. It was too tempting. The less immediate benefit of gobbling the marshmallow in front of them was stronger than the strategy of waiting. Crucially, it was observed that these children went on to have lives blighted by a lack of impulse control, and fared much worse than the children who were best at subordinating immediate fun for long-term benefit. Relationships are perhaps no different. Here too, many things feel very urgent. We're angry and want to get out. We're excited by a new person and need to abandon our present partner at once. And yet, as we look around for the exit, every way seems blocked. It would cost a fortune. It would be embarrassing. It would take an age. This isn't a coincidence. Marriage is a giant inhibitor of impulse, set up by our conscience to keep our libidinous, ungrateful, wild, desiring selves in check. What we're essentially buying into by submitting to its dictates is the insight that we are, as individuals, likely to make very poor choices under the sway of strong short-term impulses.
Today, more and more men are choosing not to go to school, not to get a job, and not to get married. If similar numbers of women were doing the same, someone would raise the alarm. But since men are the ones opting out, the problem has been mostly met with silence. Men are opting out of marriage, in addition to education and work, at alarming rates. This isn't due to laziness, but due to rational choices where men no longer see the value of participating in these areas.
So social capital theory deals with 3 distinct concepts. The first concept is that of a resource. A resource can be anything that allows someone to get something done. It can be a thing, a person with influence, a piece of software, or yet something else. Let's assume you need a camera. You don't know anything about cameras, but a friend of you does. You're very likely to reach out to that person to ask his or her opinion as to what you need. Or say you're looking for a new job. One strategy is to explore through friends and people you know if there are any opportunities out there for you, and if you could potentially get an introduction. Or, as a third example, you might have a good idea for a new business. Once you start talking to a lot of your contacts, sanity check your idea or enrich it, your idea starts taking shape, or you might potentially find your first customer. The camera you'd buy, the job you'd be getting, or the business you'd build are determined by large part through the resources in your network that you're invoking in the process. The second concept is structure of the network, or so-called topology. Your social network comprises of people and their relationships. The size of your network depends primarily on you, your preferences, and your ability to build one. And both size and type of acquaintances and friends determine the quality, diversity, and amount of resources you can potentially access.
Well, looking back, I just wish that I'd listened before I weighed in on this, or I wouldn't have said what I said. And
Henry has since released an apology saying, "Having seen the reaction to an article in particular about my feelings on dating and the Me Too movement, I just wanted to apologize for any confusion and misunderstanding that this may have created."
In his apology, Robbins also said, "While I've dedicated my life to working with victims of abuse all over the world, I need to get connected to the brave women of Me Too. I am committed to being part of the solution."
40 years ago, a book called The Greening of America caused a sensation. On the cover were these words: "There is a revolution coming. It will be like revolutions. It will not be like revolutions in the past. It will originate with the individual." The author was a young Harvard academic called Charles Reich. His message was that political action had failed and only culture and introspection could change the world. The way forward lay not in direct action, not in storming the barricades, but looking inward at ourselves. His message became part of a growing, insidious public relations campaign aimed at reclaiming Western capitalism from the sense of freedom inspired by the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement. In other words, the individual, the self, was now the zeitgeist, driven by the forces of consumerism and the media. The search for personal consciousness and fulfillment became a market opportunity and all but overwhelmed the spirit of social justice and internationalism. A new deity was proclaimed. The personal is the political. And many on the left began to confuse their own personal and bourgeois enlightenment, as they saw it, with the change and revolution for all humanity. In the West, the revival of militarism and the search for a new threat following the end of the Cold War drew strength from this confusion, from the political disorientation of those who 20 years earlier would have formed a vehement opposition to war and injustice. When September the 11th, 2001 happened, these people were all but silenced and co-opted into a bogus war on terror. For example, the invasion of Afghanistan in October 2001 was supported by leading feminists in the United States, where Hillary Clinton and other false tribunes of feminism made the Taliban's treatment of Afghan women the reason for attacking a stricken country and causing the deaths of thousands of innocent people. That reason was bogus, as we now know. This hijacking of progressive thought continued in the media and politics. Women were encouraged to think of themselves as liberated, at best only in relation to men, almost never in relation to the power that rules both women and men. The angst of women seeking personal solutions and fulfillment fill newspapers and magazines. In the Democratic Party in the United States, a movement known as Emily's List encouraged the positive discrimination for women in politics, regardless of what politics they believed in. In the UK, a similar group of women MPs in the Labour Party, known as Blair's Babes, dramatically increased female representation in Parliament. Almost all of them voted for Blair's criminal invasion of Iraq. It's as if feminism has been hijacked under the noses of women and claimed by those pretending to empower women, but really containing them. In Australia, something similar has happened, as if the proud legacy of Australian feminism has been forgotten. Are young women told about the Australian women who mounted a unique campaign against conscription during the slaughter of the First World War? A poster headed "The Blood Vote" showed a defiant woman voting against war and saying she wouldn't doom a man to death. On polling day, all but one of Australia's political leaders urged a yes vote, but the nation followed the women and voted no. Such was true feminism. Thanks to Vashti Kenway and her comrades, women and men, the courageous, principled action against Max Brenner chocolates outlets in Melbourne, and the violence of the Victorian police and of the state itself has been exposed. That is true feminism. Can you imagine that today with the anti-war movement, when the anti-war movement, rather, is not allowed in politics and the media to have a positive public face, male or female, that represents perhaps a true silent majority in this country? So what's happened to modern feminism? Why is so much of it apparently bereft of its political, indeed socialist roots? It seems that any woman who achieves some form of power within an immoral system is to be admired.
And justice for only one group of society to the exclusion of another is like a bird without one wing. It just doesn't fly. Men have a fundamental need for justice just the same as women do. And whilst the very word feminism discriminates, the word justice doesn't. Justice means giving people what they deserve or merit. But as we'll see, feminism and justice are not synonymous. Feminism is a highly ambiguous term, straitjacketing instead of liberating. It is the call for gender privilege, masquerading as equality. In essence, feminism denies a human reality, it is unclear, and not the cause for justice. To begin, feminists advocate that women have traditionally been dehumanized in a male-dominated society, which they call the patriarchy, and that it has always been better to be a man. But this one-sided claim snubs the privileges that women have often enjoyed simply for being women. The dynamics of society at the most basic level show that it has actually always been better to be a woman. Biologically, every woman counts in reproduction and perpetuating life itself, giving each woman an intrinsic worth regardless of what she does. It only takes one man, however, for many women to have children. So historically, this gave rise to the idea amongst human societies that men are largely disposable, whilst every woman is indispensable. This is why instinctively we prioritise safety and comfort for women rather than men, why women are rescued first in any emergency or disaster and get the first seat in lifeboats, why men tend to work longer hours, risking life and limb in the more dirty and dangerous jobs like being coal miners, oil drillers, foot soldiers, construction workers, rubbish collectors, and the male relative acting as the unpaid bodyguard in the home. To quote one activist, women are human beings whilst men are human doings. This privilege is not appreciated by feminists because, as pro-feminist Michael Kimmel once said, privilege is invisible to those who have it. When it comes to violent crime, the reality is that the more violent the crime, the more likely the victim is to be a man. Men are more than twice as likely to be murdered than women in the UK. When it comes to domestic violence, The Guardian reported that men are the victims more than 40% of the time, excluding unreported cases. And men are half as likely to tell anyone about it in the first place. When it comes to the provision of refuges, there are 7,500 for females in England and Wales, but only 60 for men. As for male rape victims within UK prisons, there's a collective state of denial. It's just not taken seriously. Men are held to a higher standard of self-defense, and so they often suffer in silence, reluctant to be re-victimized by an unsympathetic legal system or disbelieving treatment from professionals. Yet feminists generally remain egregiously quiet about male suffering as a result of the resulting social roles. Whilst feminists seek liberation from the shackles of the traditional female role, the man is still expected to continue his traditional disposable role. This one-sided narrative of feminism is not the way forward. For feminists, equality is merely a facade to favour women, often at the expense of others. Like when former Equality Minister Harriet Harman, a feminist, publicly requested employers to discriminate against white men and hire women instead if both candidates were equally qualified. Or when former Equality Minister Patricia Hewitt, also a feminist, was found guilty of breaching the Sex Discrimination Act by overlooking a strong male applicant for a job in favour of a weaker female applicant. So feminists claim to seek equality and call for a 40% minimum female quota on management boards, but conspicuously do not call for a 40% minimum quota for soldiers, prison guards, lumberjacks, miners, bodyguards or construction workers. Why is that? Why not campaign for an end to the women and children first policy on lifeboats and have it first come, first serve? Why not have women and men compete side by side in the Olympics as equals? Of course, the reason feminists won't advocate this is because it's not really about equality, but the means to achieve gender privilege. Another shocking example is the feminist campaign for closing women's prisons. The Fawcett Society, the UK's leading feminist campaign for closing the inequality gap between women and men, campaigned that female prisons did not suit women's needs. So, as recommended in a report by Baroness Corsten, they should be closed and replaced with what is in effect women's social clubs, where female offenders get to spend time with each other, organising their own shopping, budgets and cooking, and then go home to their children at the end of each day. The Corsten report also stated that women and men are different. Equal treatment of women and men does not result in equal outcomes, going on to claim that women are governed by hormones in a monthly cycle, which affects their moods and emotions. These biological factors have a direct bearing on the way in which women experience stressful events during their lives. If a man was to say that about treating women differently in the workplace, he'd be called a misogynist. Strangely though, feminists are completely happy for women to say that women are governed by hormones and cite biological factors when it comes to obtaining privileges. So for feminists, male criminals are to be punished to the full extent of the law, whilst female criminals should get comfort and help. Why is male suffering an injustice less important than female suffering an injustice? Surely justice doesn't discriminate, but as we can see, feminism does. Feminists are not asking for equal treatment, but special treatment, gender privilege. Women do not need gender privilege, and therefore they do not need feminism. In reality, they, along with men, need justice, a comprehensive justice for all.
Just to refresh your memory, the woke movement was supposed to be about people of color, not getting opportunities, the at-bats that they deserved, finally making that happen. And it was about that for about 8 seconds. And then somehow, white women swung their Gucci-booted feet over the fence of oppression and stuck themselves at the front of the line. I don't know how they did it. I've never heard so much complaining in my life from white women. My life is so hard with my SUV and my heated seats. You have no idea what it's like to be me. Trash and white guys, the nerve. Where's the camera? The nerve of you white women.
And I feel bad. But I just feel like this is all happening for a reason. And ladies, I want you to win this fight. 10 years ago, I might have been scared, but I got a daughter now, so if you win, she wins. So I'm rooting for you. And I agree with you. At least ideologically, I do. I don't know if you're doing it just right, but who am I to say? I don't think you're wrong. I just think that you can't make a lasting peace this way. You got all the bad guys scared, and that's good. But the minute they're not scared anymore, it will get worse than it was before. Fear does not make lasting peace. Ask black people. And that's what it is. What this city really needs, without irony, I'll say this, the cure for LA is in South Africa. You motherfuckers need truth and reconciliation with one another. Because the end of apartheid should have been a fucking bloodbath by any metric in human history, and it wasn't. And the only reason it wasn't is because Desmond Tutu and Mandela and all these guys figured out that if a system is corrupt, then the people who adhere to the system and are incentivized by that system are not criminals. They are victims. And that the system itself must be tried. But because how systems work is so compartmentalized as far as information, the only way we can figure out what the system is if everybody says what they did.
If we learned anything from all the Wikipedia stuff, Snowden, Manning, and so on, is that the true problem today is not that corrupted guy used the institution for his or her own, usually it's him, of course, private corrupted purposes, and so on and so on. The problem is, if I may use this moralist term, what we call evil, violence, whatever you call it, inscribed into the very functioning of the institution. What, for example, all the WikiLeaks, the first wave of papers, rendered clear is not that there was a corrupted military or CIA official. No, this is how the institution functions. Which is why, as Snowden pointed out, the institution, establishment, is always ready to be self-critical when you can locate it to a specific corrupted person. In this way, institution emerges as clean. You know, oh, sorry, we were not careful enough, that guy there was corrupted, and so on and so on. And to repeat another old story of mine, maybe you heard it, it's a good example. That's why I was very critical. I know I mentioned it in this same room already. I hope you saw, but now it's already 15 years ago, that German movie which even got an Oscar, Lives of the Others. My criticism of that movie was not that it's too anti-communist, but that in some paradoxical sense is not anti-communist enough. In what sense? You know the story. A well-known East German writer, performed even theater writer. His pieces are performed in the West. He, to cut a long story short, a corrupted minister of culture in GDR wants to screw his wife, and of course, so he wants to get rid of the husband, so he orders Stasi to control him totally, to find something to being able to get rid of him, to accuse him of some treason, blah, blah, blah. I found this ridiculous. First, I know a little bit. I visited it. I know about East Germany. A figure like the one who is depicted in the film, not the good Stasi guy, but the writer. Listen, in real GDR, he would have been under total police control, as all their big names were, Brecht and so on, even if no minister wants to fuck your wife. You see the problem. The illusion of the film is, oh, it wouldn't have been so bad if that corrupted minister would not want to screw his wife and so on. No, it was in the system. That's why, again, establishment always likes this personification of guilt. Oh, it's that corrupted guy, and so on and so on. And here, it's not enough to ask, because the first critical step is, of course, okay, but how could such a corrupted guy advance to that post? No, even this is not enough. Our true focus should be, again, the true horror, which is the evil not performed by corrupted particular individuals, but inscribed into the very normal standard functioning of the institution, so that one can, and that's for me the true horror, one can easily imagine individuals who are in some, a little bit weird, but nonetheless sense, quite honest individuals. They sincerely maybe think they are doing their patriotic duty and so on, and they are doing what they are doing. That's for me the true discovery of WikiLeaks and all that stuff. This pervasive, okay, I don't like the term evil, I just use it, don't put too much into it. Evil which is part of the normal functioning of the institution. That's why, maybe if you read my comment, I mentioned, how is he called, the ex-boss of FBI, James Haley, or who he was, who he published his memoirs attacking Trump with the title Higher Duty, something like this. And I believe him. His accusations against Trump are true, and so on and so on. I'm just saying that I fear almost more these honest, patriotic guys. They are the most dangerous, because they are not even aware what they are doing. Doesn't explode at Gorky by ideological criticism. You're a victim of religious indoctrination, shame on you. No, Lenin, it's incredible. Look, Gorky writes him a letter on construction of God. Lenin's answer, I quote, "Dear Alexei Maximovich, Gorky, what are you doing then? Really, it's terrible. Why are you doing this? It's painful. Take care of yourself more seriously. Really, so that you will be able to travel in winter without catching cold and visit best specialists in Switzerland and so on." What shocked me so much is that confronted with this, Lenin's reaction is purely medical. Gorky got crazy, nothing to do with ideological confusion. It must be a physical illness. It should be treated as such. And although, and it's so nice that he has even in this letter a cynical stab at Bolsheviks, because then Lenin writes, please go to doctors, but not to Bolshevik doctors, they're stupid. Go to serious German nerve specialists and so on and so on. Why I'm saying this? Because I've written about it, maybe you know, that this is not yet Stalinism. This is brutal objectivizing Leninism. Stalinism does a step more. In Stalinism resubjectivizes the situation. In Stalinism, you are subjectively guilty. Again.
Parents at a Victorian school are outraged after their sons were forced to stand up at a school assembly and say sorry for sexism. The boys at the college in Warrnambool were told to apologise to girls for offensive behaviour on behalf of their gender.
He said that he was made to stand up and basically apologise. It wasn't explained properly to the male students what they were doing or why they were doing it.
Use 752 puts her in model citizen range and gets her discounts and privileges, like using a shared bike without a deposit. She likes it. Her friends do too. They all have pretty high scores.
It's a mechanism like pushes you to become a better citizen, to build on the trust, especially on the Chinese market.
Because you're not going to be punished if you haven't done anything wrong.
I think that's the point. I think the system is working as a warning or an alert to push people to do it, to be a good person.
And it's mandatory. When it goes national, social credit scores will be assigned to every one of China's citizens for life.
I was told by many of you that you like this movie, Parasite, the South Korean one. I think it's an excellent film because, you know, it demystifies the poor who live in the basement or what. They're not portrayed as nice people with a heart. No, the nice people with good heart kind are the richer one up there. Why? Because I think it's somebody says in the film, you know, when you are rich enough, you can afford to be nice and so on.
The reason why supporting group for men is non-existent isn't literally fucking women being like, you can't have a support group for yourself. It's because of toxic masculinity. It's because of gender patriarchy hurting other fucking men. It's this ridiculous approach to mental health that men have.
Have people being able to have that talk. If it's just guys talking in a circle about their different issues and whatever those are, and you can then switch to different groups. Guys talking about prostate cancer if they get diagnosed early, guys talking about suicide, guys talking about relationship issues, guys who've been sexually victimized. There's so many different topics that men can talk about where they have issues that differ from women's issues.
The RSU says that they haven't reviewed last year's decision, but they say that men's groups represent more than just discussion on men's health and well-being.
They have those discussions from a very anti-feminist perspective and create very unsafe spaces for women.
Recently in China, the same ideology exploded. Did you read it? Did Guardian write about it? I'm not sure, although I don't trust Guardian. The Chinese now try to justify their mass persecution of so-called Uyghurs, Muslims. And I didn't know it. They justify it in strictly same medical terms, that this should be treated as a collective disease, that their concentration camps are not political camps, are big medical establishments, and that it's an illness, and there is always a problem of falling back into it, and so on and so on. Okay, I will not go into it. Just this is the reason why I am opposed to this new category introduced by American Psychological Association. I already talked about it here, you know, of toxic masculinity. The first danger I see is that it's probably, of course, there is something like poisonous, aggressive, toxic, masculine violence, and so on. But my God, it's not a medical category. It's a category of ideological struggle, patriarchy, and so on and so on. And you know, when American Psychological Association does it, it means it's billions of dollars are at stake, because when the category is introduced, then you can develop drugs to treat it, they are already working on it, and so on and so on. But what worries me more is this, quote, how American Psychological Association defines toxic masculinity. Traits of so-called traditional masculinity, like suppressing emotions and masking distress, often start early in life and have been linked to less by boys and men to seek help, more risk-taking and aggression, possibly harming themselves and those with whom they interact. That's the quote, the definition. My comment. You cannot miss the mixture of ideology and expertise in this definition. A strong ideological gesture of excluding phenomena considered unacceptable is presented as a neutral description of a medical fact. That's my first problem. But my second problem, and that's how I would counterattack it, of toxic masculinity is a certain subtle elevation of false femininity, which is pure ideological category. Today, we don't like radical disruptive acts. You must debate, you must coordinate, and so on and so on. And women are celebrated as those who are more dialogic, holistic, and so on and so on. So did I already tell you, I'm not sure, that Alenka Zupancic even found another example, wonderful one, where some reactionary psychologist claimed only men can do this, what is toxic masculinity. You know, you are right, you disregard the laws, you just do what is right even if it hurts you, while women are much more conscientious. They don't care about ultimate justification. They just follow the law and so on. So Alenka Zupancic's point was, so now we know Antigone was a man and Adolf Eichmann was a woman. Because Adolf Eichmann did exactly this. His defense was, sorry, I was just executing orders and I didn't know. I organized train transports to Auschwitz. What do I know what was in those trains and so on? You know, why am I mentioning this? For two reasons. First, that be very careful when today femininity is celebrated, so-called feminine qualities. Be very careful what type of social normativity is projected into it, social normativity which is not really about women, but women are brutally misused her to promote a certain ethics of conformism and so on and so on. You know whom they are promoting, basically? Back to Antigone. They are promoting Ismene, her sister. She is the soft one, don't provoke, and so on and so on. But for me, now, I'm not saying who cares about, I'm not talking now about an essential femininity and so on. But there are nonetheless certain ideological configurations which define how we perceive femininity, masculinity. But my temptation would be this one, to say femininity is not simply more understanding and so on, that masculinity and femininity in our historical tradition are defined by a certain duality tension. Just this tension is different, already at the level of most stupid, superficial prejudices. Did you notice how this is male chauvinist ideology? But it's typical how it's already a tension into each position. according to traditional male chauvinist ideology, men are at the same time, do we have these stupid proverbs? We in Slovene have them, that women just talk blah blah emptily, man is a man of his word. Men really mean it. So again, men are more stable, women are blah blah, flirting, lying, whatever. But at the same time, this cliché is supplemented by the opposite one, which is women are more stable for home, order.
Many colleges across the country hold these national pitch competitions for students to share their business ideas and try to win seed funding to turn them into a reality. Hunter and I created and recreated our business model many times over while applying to as many competitions as we possibly could. We finally got accepted into 2, but there were a couple of hitches. The first issue was that both competitions took place on the same exact day in 2 different states. The second issue was that one of the competitions required that the leader and the presenter of the team be a female. This may not seem like a big deal, but the other competition was TCU's Values and Ventures, and it required a 15-minute pitch, whereas the women's competition was set up like an expo. So being the overachiever I am, I wanted to do the big pitch at the major university instead of sharing our idea on a poster board among 50 other teams. But after careful consideration, we decided it would be best to compete in both and increase our chances of winning funding. So Hunter went to Texas and I went to Boston. The difference was Hunter competed among diverse teams of students whose main criteria for being there was to have an idea that served a social or environmental purpose. Whereas the main criteria for my competition was to be a woman. In fact, you could have male teammates, but they weren't even allowed to speak to the judges. The structure of this competition begs the question, what was accomplished by segregating genders and mandating leadership to women? Doesn't this sound awfully familiar to the very long history of patriarchal structures and gender separation imposed by the society that we live in?
And this is again where but we didn't have time to go it, where I had another question for Jordan Peterson. His point is, man is order, women are disorder. Even at the level of cliches, this is not true. It is true only in this male chauvinist sense, that men are order in the sense of participating in male chauvinist view, in public order and so on. Women are unreliable, blah, blah, flirting, you cannot trust them. But at the same time, women stand for family, stability, taking care of. Men are the adventurers. Like this is big male chauvinist topic. Like I already quoted it, or you find the chapter, which I quite like, of myself, one of the few, on Schiller, the Bell song, the most disgusting proto-fascist song, which describes normal order, women stay at home, man goes around, adventurer, brings the wealth home, women takes care of it, and then his explanation of the French Revolution, women also went out. Strictly, women are guilty for revolutionary terror and so on and so on. But what is correct in this view, which is disgusting, is that it at least locates in both identities, masculine and feminine. It doesn't define them by a certain feature, but by a certain tension. They both have a tension in themselves.
Everybody gets mad because I say these jokes, but you understand that this is the best time to say them. More now than ever. And I know there's some comedians in the back. Motherfucker, you have a responsibility to speak recklessly. Otherwise, my kids may never know what reckless talk sounds like.
We are doomed. And it's not only this. That's why, as I tried to hint in Toronto, that's why I remain a communist. And I got from nobody a good answer to this one. It's absolutely obvious. If you take just these three big problems, ecology, digital control, the incredible amount of how we are controlled, how will we cope with it? One thing is clear. The worst thing to do is to leave it to private companies combined with state power. Now I am writing a new book on Neuralink digital control, where I will begin with this polemics between Fichte and Hegel, where Fichte has had this vision of total police state. Everybody is controlled and so on. And Hegel goes against this in a rather cheap way, that haha, then half the people's job would have been just to control others and so on and so on. But today, with the new supercomputers and digital media, Fichte won, in a sense. You don't need so many people, and the computers which control us are getting so intelligent. Even if you are in a country like China, you can, each citizen already has an individual file. And it works. I read in news a month or two ago that, you know, that patriotic standing that you get in China. Each citizen gets a couple of points, like if you give something to charity or whatever, you get some point. If you are involved in any, if you are condemned or dissident activities, you lose points. This already works. In 2018, 30 million people were prohibited to buy plane and fast train tickets because their points were too low and so on. It can be done. And again, don't fall into this trap of just criticizing China. It's all too comfortable for us to say, yeah, the Chinese, but with us, exactly the same things are happening.
Obviously, something's up, and I can tell you that what's up isn't only a discussion about Bill C-16 and about gendered pronouns. You know, sometimes when you're having a debate or a discussion with someone that you love and you're having a little argument about something, like who's going to do the dishes or something like that, or especially if you haven't been getting along very well with that person, you know how the discussion starts with something specific and then you start trading all the things that it might be about until you're arguing about, you know, the way that you behaved on your third date, 10 years ago, and the whole underlying unresolved chaos of your relationship emerges through the little portal that was defined by the argument. Well, that's what this is about. So what the hell's going on here exactly? And why are we damn near at each other's throats? Look at what happened in the United States a week and a half ago. There's some things to talk about here, and I started to try to talk about them, and I would say that my freedom to do so was rapidly infringed upon. My career was put at risk, and I find this absolutely unacceptable because I am trying to sort this out. And so we need to start talking and listening. And when you talk, it doesn't mean you're right, it doesn't mean you're correct, right? It means you're trying to articulate and formulate your thoughts like the boneheaded moron that you are. And you're going to stumble around idiotically because what the hell do you know? You're full of biases and you're ignorant and you can't speak very well and you're over emotional. And you've got just problems that you can hardly even imagine that are interfering with your ability to state something clear. And so what you do is you do your best to say what you mean, and then you listen to other people tell you why you're a blithering idiot, and hopefully you can correct yourself to some degree as a consequence of listening to them. And you see, that's what free speech is about. It isn't just that people can organize themselves and their societies by thinking. You can't do that because there's only one of you. What you have to do is you have to articulate your thoughts in a public forum so that other people can attack you, and hopefully in a corrective manner. And then you want to step back a little bit and think, okay, well, I was a little arrogant there and I was a little over emotional there and I didn't get that quite right, and maybe I'm outright biased on that front. And you want to correct what you say, because then you correct how you are, and then you correct how you act in life, and then you correct your society. And to the degree that we limit freedom of expression, we put all of that at risk. And that's partly why I don't believe that freedom of speech is just another value.
Do you think that you could ban someone from making a speech inside of your home? Because that's kind of the same issue. Twitter is a private company, and the First Amendment doesn't prohibit private companies or individuals from controlling their own private property.
The government is threatening to punish employees that are based at the social media platform in India with fines and up to 7 years in jail if it doesn't block hundreds hundreds of Twitter accounts that have been tweeting in support of these farmer protests that have gripped the nation's capital over the last 2 months. The request made under a law that allows the government to ask social media companies to block accounts to protect, quote, the integrity of the country. Now,
type Google into Google's search engine, then hit the news tab. You might find a few stories that the tech giant would rather you didn't see. A few weeks back, we learned that Google was working on something called Project Dragonfly, a new search engine for the Chinese market, one that would function in compliance with Beijing's strict rules on censorship. In an organization that talks up transparency, it is ironic that only a handful of the company's 88,000 employees knew about this project. When some of them caught wind of it, they leaked the details to an online news site, The Intercept, which broke the story and put Google's top brass on the spot. Google has ventured into China before, in 2010, but back then it decided it could not live with the censorship rules there, so it pulled out. This potential re-entry into China signals a major policy U-turn involving one of the biggest tech companies on the planet and the world's largest market. Our starting point this week is Google's headquarters, Silicon Valley, USA. Times change, technology moves on, companies evolve. There was a time when Google's corporate mantra was "don't be evil." That altruistic philosophy has since been amended, watered down, if you will, to "do the right thing." Was that a mere shift in semantics? Or has Google made a moral adjustment in the way it does business, with China just being the latest, most newsworthy example of that?
Right now, under President Obama, over the last 8 years, in your mind, have race relations improved under his leadership?
Race relationships have to do with race relationships. You're white or whatever you are, I'm black or whatever I am. We're standing here talking now. That's how we get things done. You can't legislate love. The President of the United States can't legislate us into liking each other. We have to step forward and ask questions about each other and engage. There's no law that says, oh, because I'm president, you all got to get along now. So it's up to us.
And there's been so many protests in America, especially during the election. Black Lives Matter movement, for example, and those issues. Has that movement in particular, the Black Lives Matter movement, helped race relations or not in America?
Well, listen, we live in America. And in America, we have the freedom to express ourselves. We shouldn't take that for granted. So whatever the movements are, whether you agree with them or don't, they have the right to express themselves. So that's one of the great things about being in this country, that you do have the right to protest.
If we keep saying that those differences in what men and women choose to do are because of sexism, nobody's going to end up happy with what they're doing. And we're going to keep making laws to remedy what's actually just the result of freedom.
To act the right way.
And this is what this guy, Mike Crumpler, wrote me. The consent discourse is itself a huge sham. It is a naive effort to overlay a neat and tidy, intelligible, egalitarian language of social justice over the dark, discomfortable, relentlessly cruel, traumatic realm of sexuality. People do not know what they want. They are disturbed by what they desire. They desire things that they hate. They hate their fathers but want to fuck their mothers, whatever, and so on and so on. It's confused what he writes, but in some sense I agree with it. To avoid now any misunderstanding, that you will not think that my message is so, we don't need consent, bam bam, I just rape you or whatever. No, I'm absolutely for consent. I'm just saying it will not do all the job. The first thing that comes immediately to my mind is I think that a more subtle violence, by definition, happens within consent. You give a formal consent, and then you have all the more refined modes of cruelty and so on and so on. My God, we should not forget Marxist lesson that consent is, in the sense of legal contract, is the basic formula of so-called bourgeois justice. And okay, we may laugh at this, but in today's sexuality, it certainly holds that consent is not enough. A formal consent can still mask a violence.
Looks hot. Let's get it down on paper.
Now you stick your tongue in my client's mouth and I'm gonna sue your ass off.
Deal breaker.
Okay. Let's see. Talking about a standard one-night arrangement, right?
I guess. Yeah.
Right, so we'll say a dinner, complete sexual encounter, full penetration, optional episode in the morning, right?
Just slow down.
You know, I personally thought it would be nice.
Let me see this. My lawyer better see this one. For instance, the oral clause here seems a little sticky.
It's a minor point. We can work it out in bed.
Hey, you work it out in bed, because I'm not gonna be there. No deal, no deal.
And second thing, maybe even more important, that, you know, sexuality doesn't work like that. And it's not simply we know what we want and we look with sexual greed into each our eyes. Yes, we both want to do it and then everything is okay. Okay, I agree there should be consent. Again, my point is not against consent. My point is, I repeat it, that consent will not do the entire job. There can be consent and still there can be trauma. Because, you know, let's be very traditional here. Are we really forgetting so fast the lesson of Freud? That we are, I'm sorry for this old term, divided beings who don't know what they want, who don't want what they desire, and so on and so on. So we should just be a little bit more careful here. Next point that I find problematic in this feminine this movement is the idea, basic idea, that no means no, it's not enough. That there can also be a coerced yes. I totally agree with this. Let me read you a quote and then do my critique, which is not critique in the sense of denying anything that's there, just to show where another dimension of violence resides. A quote from a report of this in a long essay published online on The Guardian. Quote, badgering someone into quasi-submission might technically be within the law, but it is not the road to a happy sex life, and it may no longer protect a man from public censure. What young men should look for is not the potentially ambiguous absence of no, but the enthusiastic presence of a yes, 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 or affirmative consent. In 218, no means no is totally antiquated. It puts all the pressure on the person in the most vulnerable position. A woman, that is someone that if someone doesn't have the capacity of the confidence to speak up, they are going to be violated. If somebody isn't an enthusiastic yes, if they are hesitating, if they like, oh, I don't know, at this point in time, that equals no. End of quote. To avoid any misunderstanding, I totally agree with this. How, you know, this wavering yes means no, it's a subtle game, no problem here. What I reproach to this quote, line of thought, is not that it's, as usually liberals, Catherine Deneuve type of liberals do, don't they go a little bit too far? No, they don't go far enough. Why not? Let me elaborate it a little bit. What is problematic is what they call, in this quote, the enthusiastic pressure of a yes, yes, the enthusiastic, presence of a yes, yes, yes. I immediately see here an opening for ridiculing women. Imagine, I'm sorry to be almost personal, imagine, sorry, I apologize in advance, that you, and you have the full right to do it, you see a guy, you like him, you want to fuck him. But let's say the guy is, why not, it's not bad, very politically correct. And it doesn't work in that way, some ambiguous hints and so on.
he is afraid that it's not a full yes. So how do you then express this enthusiastic yes, yes, yes? Sorry, but the implication is that what? Should you jump ahead of him, yes, yes, please fuck me, or whatever? I mean, you know, the whole point of seduction is that this formula, enthusiastic yes, 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 is so ambiguous. You don't do it in this way. It doesn't work. Or another problem that I see here, the other part of this logic is how they say every person should have, partner in a sexual act, should have the right to withdraw at any moment. My God. Do these people know how sex life really goes on? From numerous friends of mine of both sexes, I heard for decades, I hear stories of how this right to say no, yes, I am for this right, but we should be aware how it can be used for extreme, brutal, emotional violence. I know men, disgusting men, who boasted to me how their strategy is to really arouse a woman. You are naked with her, she is all, sorry for the vulgarity, wet and so on. And then when she is really into it, you say, not in these words, but de facto, sorry, now I lost interest, I want to use my right to withdraw. Or women doing the same, and so on. Can you imagine something more brutal than arousing your partner, giving him all the, and then use this as the utter humiliation? This is what fascinates. So my point, you got my point, is not, no, this means we can rape women. I'm not crazy. It means just that there are no simple formulas for conduct which guarantee it, that there will not be violence. That's sexuality. Every ambiguity, every rule can be, in this sense, can be turned around. And this is where I find problematic. Did you read it? I found it a little bit depressive. Did you read now Monica Lewinsky joined Me Too campaign. And she claimed, as it is predictable, that she was really a victim of Bill Clinton. I mean, she admits she made the initiative and so on, but she said she was young, she didn't know what she was doing, and since Bill Clinton was first in position of power, the most powerful man and much older than her, he should have rejected her and put her at her proper place, as she said. I find this logic pretty terrifying, because it, first, what did she do wrong? I mean, one problem is marital fidelity. Okay, if you believe in that, and I'm tempted to believe in that, she was obviously, by trying to seduce Bill Clinton, in some sense unfair towards Hillary. I consider this as a serious argument. But if you abstract from this, she just enacted her desire, and probably Bill Clinton's political power was part of his attraction for her. She wanted to be effed by that guy, and she acted on it. What's wrong about this? Why shouldn't a woman make the initiative, and so on? But what I find so suspicious in her defense is this presenting women as, so even when a woman, as she was, when she was Bill Clinton's, whatever, that in some office in White House working, that even when she is totally active, she is really a victim. I don't like this false innocence. It reminds me of an old story that I repeated often here, you must remember it, that about in what happened in Australia some 10 years ago, where a woman was raped walking alone on the street, is a Muslim woman by a series of guys, and then some top is Muslim authority there blamed the woman. He said, he used that infamous metaphor that if you leave a piece of meat unwrapped on the street and dogs eat it, you would not blame the dogs. You would have blamed the idiot who left the meat there. And of course, the parallel was in the same way. If a woman although she was not naked, walks on the street, if she gets raped, even if men are active and she is raped, she is totally responsible. She should be punished. But isn't a symmetrical reversal, it's not quite symmetrical, power relations are different, but nonetheless, isn't there a symmetrical reversal with regard to what Monica Lewinsky did? In both cases, she was active, the way the man undoubtedly raped a girl in Australia. But the interpretation is, even if she is active, she is innocent like the man, because the object of their activity was the one which really instigated the act. Now, I'm not, sorry, should we cut it off? What's the secret message? Tell me. Does it concern me?
Jacqueline has made the following point.
Yeah.
You ready? If the topic is sexual harassment, it should be a conversation.
What do you mean by this? That women also?
So there should be some kind of possibility of coming back on the topics, on the way in which you're addressing this topic.
Yeah, but I'm not making a general point about it. I don't think I here presented some kind of a... I think I even did, in some sense, maybe we'll disagree, something which is not totally dissimilar to what, because of my eye problem, I wasn't yet able to do it, something similar to what you did. I was told that you did a good text for London Review of Books about all these ambiguities of Me Too and so on. Because again, let's make it clear. My point is not women are exaggerating and so on. My point is just how precisely, because of the utter ambiguity of sexual tensions and so on, you cannot guarantee anything in this direct way. It can be turned around and so on and so on. But okay,
but I think the point that Jacqueline's making, if I can speak for Jacqueline,
yeah.
is one about process here.
Process in the sense?
One about process in the sense of who speaks about sexual harassment and the way in which that's taken up.
I agree, but I would be very afraid to draw from here a conclusion that women have some big kind of privilege here. I think that my utter line of defense here, not of men, would be that the way to address all these harassments would be to bring in men as victims, not victims of women, but I claim that every time when men are violent, in some, now I speak for men as myself, in some sense they are themselves, a rapist always in some sense enacts his impotence, or typical example in Mexico. I read books on rapes here, there, and it's always the example that men who feel threatened by single women. So I think that the way to fight it is not to make men innocent victims of circumstances. No, we are responsible when we rape. I'm not saying, no, we are not guilty, blah, 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 with that. But what I'm saying is that our aggressivity and so on is not simply a sign of our power. It's in some deeper sense a sign of our impotent frustrations and so on. We are also the victims of the situation. You want to
make a very quick point. I mean, so we're talking about men and women, but what about children involved in all this? The victims of paedophilia, you know, the perpetrators tend to be men.
Yeah, but where do you see here? Okay, I agree, but that's another topic. Why do you think that I'm soft there? No, my answer there would have been just, and I'm here absolutely without mercy for pedophilia. But what fascinates me is how things changed from '68. I often repeat in my text this story. How do you know that in late '60s, early '70s, French journals published a proclamation, public call, signed by all big names, Sartre, Foucault, not Lacan, goes to his honor, Althusser, name them, claiming that incest and child sex the prohibition should be abolished, that there will only be sexual liberation when parents will be able to have sex with their small not yet adolescent, and everybody signed it. So I would like to point out how this changes, how strange that a thing which at that point was generally accepted in the French media as liberation is now the ultimate horror.
So maybe we should just move on to the last bit of your talk, and then we can pick up the issues in a more conversational way.
So again, sorry, with children, I'm fanatically against child pornography. My point is not, I'm just saying how, although we should be against child pornography, I still think that this elevation of children, of raping children, pedophilia, as the ultimate sin, is part of an anti-Freudian move. With all our sexual liberation and so on, we regressed with regard to Freud. Children are considered innocent, asexualized. It's considered almost the ultimate sin. So it just interests me, this historical shift of how what began as I remember when I was young, some British feminist, if I'm wrong, I think Shulamit Firestone, wrote again how the true liberation will only become when parents will be able to sleep with their children and so on and so on. Now this is the ultimate horror. So nonetheless, things are not as automatic as they appear here. So again, okay, I'm getting caught here. Maybe we should. Maybe I should stop here. My central point is not that everything is blurred and so on and so on. We need precise rules. But I think that at least we should shift, as it were. First, we should be aware that while we need firm legal regulations, and I think, for example, do you have it in the UK, a regulation like that it makes unwanted, imposed sex in a marriage also a rape? Can here wife prosecute her husband for rape? That's, for example, something maybe much more important than all the politically correct stuff for me. Can you even imagine what unthinkable horrors are going on at this level? I mean, let's turn to this misery of daily life. Can I just conclude with a funny detail? But it's prohibited, yes, but it's prohibited to mention it. The majority of women and men, let's face it, I include myself in this category, are, in some vulgar sense, not beautiful, not sexually over-attractive. I know I can be accused if I say this for, you know, like, seeing others only as sex objects and so on and so on. But it's a brutal truth, which means that, like, can we imagine the, not suffering in the sense of torture, but the inner turmoil and so on of people who are simply, most of their life, not in a position to be sexual objects, where we have in Slovene, you I think also have it, this nice expression that the other potential partner simply looks through you, you know, you are not noticed. Millions are terribly suffering like this. How to approach this without falling into sexist traps and so on and so on? I mean, there is so much more to say here. And again, that worries me. Because, you know, to finish, Arthur Koestler, we know him, he wrote something precisely apropos of Holocaust. It was very heroic. He said that the horror of terrible crimes like Holocaust is that it doesn't corrupt only the executors. In some more subtle way, it corrupts also the victims. And, you know, these problems emerge here. Okay, I will stop now just to tell you that what I will do at a much more serious level in at summer school. What am I doing now? This may amuse you, serious. is to address finally the big metaphysical questions. We have now Habermasians who exert some kind of authority, and then we have these new ontologists from Graham Harman, new materialism, object-oriented ontology, this happy return to ontology. I think it all began with Deleuze. You know, the idea is the reaction against deconstruction. Like deconstruction is caught in this vicious circle of just deconstructing in some abyss of reflexivity, offering these happy visions of like Deleuze, these multiple happy worlds of I don't know, multitudes interacting and so on. Even Badiou is too much into this, I think. This idea that this eternal focus on negativity should be finally left behind, and we need a new positive ontology. I'm opposed to it. I'm radically opposed to this, but nonetheless, they are approaching the right question, which is, like, I always asking this my deconstructionist friends, like Avital Ornell and Eduardo Cadava in New York, okay, cut the bullshit. What do you think? What is reality? Can we even ask this question? Are things out there in the world? Do we subjects constitute it? And so on and so on. And what I get from them is usually just some social symbolic constructive. Very difficult to talk about it. Isn't reality as we know it always constructed through social practice and so on and so on? That's not enough. So I will try to approach directly, and my result, to provoke you, sexually even, will be that, don't laugh, I'm not crazy, that sexuality is our privileged contact with the absolute. Don't laugh. I'm not becoming, in my old age, a new ager. I'm not saying when you are in the orgasmic trial, there you glimpse divinity. No, quite the opposite. Sexuality, I mean it in a Lacanian sense, that the basic ontological feature is the inconsistent antagonism of reality, and our basic experience of this constitutive failure, incompleteness of reality is sexuality. In this precise sense, sexuality is our contact with the absolute. I will develop all this later. Now, believe me or not, I stop talking.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's. Do you want to reply directly, please?
Before we get started on the question, I think Jacqueline wants to come in, and I also wanted to just ask you something before. Is that okay? Very briefly, I'd like to hear you say something about limits. I was in the. I don't know if you saw the film The Last Laugh, which is about. It raises the question. It's a film about the question: can you make jokes about Auschwitz? And there's a wonderful exchange in it between Mel Brooks, you know, the producer's film about comedy about Nazis, and Sarah Silverman, the American comic. Sarah Silverman gives this absolutely, well, what could I call it? I don't know, horrific Holocaust joke at an awards ceremony for Mel Brooks. And Mel Brooks says, look, I can make jokes about Nazis, but I can't make jokes about Auschwitz. I admire her, but I couldn't do that. I'm just interested in whether you think there is anything that's outside the limits of what can be commented on, what can be joked about.
There obviously are limits. For example, if you ask me, I will be very personal. My personal equivalent to that, but horror equivalent to that, stick finger into your ass, is I read somewhere, and the industrialized form shocked me. You know that one of the things that Germans, for the use of torture in camps, produced massively is like, you know, those machines simple to break nuts and so on, eggs, balls, squash. So that you put a testicle and squash it. And there is something for me, okay, I can imagine it, although in no way doing it, that some brutal thug in an act of despair squeezes your balls. But isn't there something terrifying in how you industrialize also
but
this.
I think
I find it a little bit difficult.
But I think I'm asking you what you think your responsibility might be at the level of what can and can't be spoken about and how it can be spoken about.
I think with regard to political correctness that I'm a Leninist here, concrete analysis of a concrete situation, it all depends on the discursive effect. If the effect is, without any doubt, that of horror, not of secret pleasure. And my model, I mentioned it here, of secret pleasure is, and it's confirmed again, I spoke with many people. Did you see the TV miniseries Handmaid's Tale? I'm against it. Because I think that, and all my friends are confirming this to me. Yes, you're supposed to be horrified that new patriarchal world, but all my friends are secretly enjoying it. My God, how wonderful, they treat women like this, that ritual. They are all fascinated by this world. They cross the limit for me, although nothing horrible happens. The limit is, does the horror depicted feed you with some obscene enjoyment? The limit is strictly at this level. And you can go pretty far here. I think we even talked about it. You know what he did? Maybe problematic. Larry David. In one of his Curb Your Enthusiasm, he has a party stage where two guys meet, two survivors. One Auschwitz survivor and one survivor who won the TV reality show Survivor. And they fight who suffered more, and of course, because it's a comedy, the reality TV show wins. You know, like, at least you in Auschwitz, you were in those warm huts, what about me out in the jungle then? And I am tempted to buy this. It's not humiliating, because we all know it's a bad taste joke, and the way it is shot, we all know that's the point, that you cannot even compare the two. That the true horror was Auschwitz. That's the presupposition of it working. So my answer would be, one has to be, instead of simple direct rules, Auschwitz is out of touch or whatever, one should ask this crucial question. Are you meant to be horrified by the victim? How does it work? Or is it secret enjoyment? As Lacan said, we are always responsible for our enjoyment.
Okay, thank you. Jacqueline.
I would like to respond to Slavoj, but I realize there's hundreds of people in this room who may want to say something.
But you can speak on their behalf. Like
No, I'm sure the hundreds of people would like to hear your response.
Yes. So we should just see whether people would like to speak first.
No, Jacqueline, let you go.
All right, I could be as co-director of the Berkeley Institute of Humanities, where I'm a colleague with Slavoj, but I have a responsibility to respond to this evening's talk. And we've had conversations before. Let me start by saying, you say in the summer school you're going to talk about something much more serious. I don't think anything could have been more serious than the discussion that's taking place today in terms of what it touched on, the question of limits, who speaks for who and how.
Yeah.
I think those are the questions that have been raised in a fully gendered dimension by what you presented this evening. Let me start by saying that I think your analysis of The Smiling Lieutenant is fabulous. And
Too simple. Much more can be said. See the movie.
Sure. Okay, I will see the movie. No, I'm not sure I dare to see the movie. But anyway, I thought that was quite you and your most brilliant style. And I also thought your point about the 1960s, when perversion was seen as radical, whereas it in fact is the other side.
Yeah.
And the suspicion of hysteria, which is much more in touch with the unconscious, was a kind of anti-feminist plot. So there were really strong points in what you said, which I appreciate.
But
yeah, the but's coming. Okay, the but is, I'll put it at its crudest and then I'll
please.
elaborate. You cannot speak for Monica Lewinsky.
For?
You cannot speak for Monica Lewinsky. You cannot tell her what she was experiencing and what she wanted and what she didn't want. What Monica Lewinsky has done is not turn herself into a victim, she's turned herself into an agent by speaking out now and by rereading the experience she had as a young intern. You spoke entirely from the position of her assumed desire. You cannot speak for her, you cannot assume her desire, you cannot speak from that position. Neither can I, by the way, but still, nonetheless, I think this is a real problem.
If you have a dick, you need to shut the fuck up on this one. Seriously. This is theirs. The right to choose is their unequivocal right. Not only do I believe they have the right to choose, I believe that they shouldn't have to consult anybody, except for a physician, about how they exercise that right. Gentlemen, that is fair.
Or telling them what you think is best for them, that is also wrong. So what I have here is a male ally manifesto and a few things that I think men can do.
So, I mean, as we begin to close, I would like you to talk about how you come to your feminist consciousness. Because see, that's what people don't understand, that when I met you, what impressed me was the transformation of your consciousness. Not that you, even though I did respect your being able to be open about violence, but it was the other work on your mind, on how do I perceive women, what do I expect from women, what do I hope for?
Yeah. I mean, there's a few things I say to, I do a lot of workshops with fraternities. I belong to a fraternity, a lot of athletes, and men in general. First thing I say is you have to own your patriarchy. You have to own your sexism. I think, and that's the hardest thing for us to do. You know, I remember last year I was at a very elite college. I'm not going to say the name of it, but I was in a group of 11 fraternities over the course of 2 weeks, every night. And I asked them some basic questions, Belle. I said, well, what's a man? Y'all know what they said, accountable, responsible, all these different things, leader, et cetera. By the time they were done, I said, well, you just described my single mother. Now, can you tell me what a man is? Second thing, I asked them a simple question. Can you tell me 5 to 10 women in American or world history that you have a working knowledge of? No one could answer the question beyond Rosa Parks, Betsy Ross, Hillary Clinton, a few other women. Do you see where I'm going with this? It was ignorance. And the reason why I was brought into this school to deal with the issue of patriarchy is because this school, one of the top schools in this country, has such a horrific track record around the sexual assault of women on that campus that women on that campus actually wrote an open letter saying we do not feel safe even associating with these fraternities, you know? And these men, in spite of admitting they had no idea what a man was, they could not talk articulately about the contributions of women and girls to world history. At the same time, they were pushing back hard. Well, she was there, so I was going to have sex with her. Not even understanding what the word consent meant. You know what I mean? So for me, you can't get to a quote-unquote feminist consciousness if you're not willing to take ownership as a man and understand that we are beneficiaries of privilege and power. And that includes black males.
Absolutely, and that is has been one of our hardest things to teach because, and that's why I'm a little bit suspicious of all the focus on black males right now and racism in terms of its obscuring of gendered power that black men hold.
That's right.
And the fact that it makes people feel like, well, you know, you're not caring about the brother if you start talking about.
That's BS.
Yeah, the patriarchal. You know, what's up with that?
Yeah, it's insanity. You know, to me, as an activist, if I can use that language for a second, Belle, I feel, well, we always say, how can you talk about oppression and then you turn around and be an oppressor yourself?
If you're that man, my brother, and his buddies that have been told you're not worth a nickel, where is the space where you will begin to interrogate?
Patriarchy, not biology, patriarchy teaches men that they have to be these hard, fucking, unfeeling, just work. That's all men are good for. It's like work and sex, and that's not true. Some of the greatest artists of all time have been men, and yet we live in a culture where artistic boys are bullied for being too soft, right? So again, men are not the problem. Patriarchy is the problem. Specifically psychological patriarchy.
Some of the issue here is that it may be the psyche of the men that when they make less, they are insecure and it can affect their relationship. This report is about the
women complaining about the fact that oh, now I got to get a guy better than me.
So are these women expecting the men to cover everything? They want those breadwinners, so they...
That's what it sounds like to me by this particular study. I have to date down now. What is that? You wanted to make more money, you make more money. What's the if there is a responsibility with making more money? First of all, I don't believe in any of it. But if there's a responsibility that comes with making more money, accept it. You wanted to make more money. You know, are you going to find many men out there that makes as much as you do?
And my point is, so now you're going to, because we hear so much about women that are like, oh, there's nobody out there, there's no one out there, I can't find love, I'm getting too old. Now you're going to sacrifice the fact that you could find that love because the man's not making that much money, and you're going to date down?
All right.
No,
They're wrapping us. I have a feeling this is going to be our morning rush extra.
I could do bad by myself.
Left to say.
Yo, that black girl was so salty.
She was so salty that
her
whole argument just got trashed.
And ladies, to be fair to us, I also believe if you decide to have the baby, a man should not have to pay. That's fair. If you can kill this motherfucker, I can at least abandon him. It's my money, my choice. And if I'm wrong, then perhaps we're wrong. So figure that shit out for yourselves.
Why do you look for him mad?
Oh, money, of course. It's very important. As long as he's got money, that's the most important thing there is.
The objectification of men. Now, why don't we start with that?
Yes.
Now, some men say that they've experienced objectification or this type of discrimination just like women have.
Yeah, okay.
So is it fair to say it's a double standard? I mean, I think we have a different opinion on this matter, but Anna, you go ahead.
Why do I always have to start first, bro? Like, I swear to God, first and foremost, it's about time that we objectify men.
Mary, I have to go to work. No, come on, move out of the way. Papa's got to go to work.
Come here.
Come on.
Come on. No, she knows.
Do you want to come with Papa to work?
No.
You want to come with Papa to work?
No, babe, no.
You do, don't you?
Oh, bring your pass. We'll come past.
I gotta go, baby. I'm sorry. I gotta go.
Do you...
Oh, come back. Come on, I gotta go. I'm sorry. All right, I love you.
It's generally known that inequality and pollution are closely connected. One connection is indicated with the concept of NIMBY, which stands for Not in My Backyard, and expresses the idea that environmentally polluting projects are usually pushed into communities that suffer from poverty and other social problems, because wealthy communities can effectively stop such projects from being built in their communities. A study that was recently published in the magazine Scientific American, however, has found that inequality not only determines how pollution and environmental damage are distributed, inequality also plays a role in how much environmental damage is created overall. In other words, that the greater the inequality in a society, the greater the environmental damage. The article is titled The Environmental Costs of Inequality and was written by James Boyce of PERI, the Political Economic Research Institute at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Professor James Boyce joins us now from Amherst. Thanks for joining us today, James.
Thank you for having me.
So, what is the link between inequality and environmental damage?
Well, the way to get a handle on that link is to first realize that when we're talking about environmental damage, we're not only talking about people damaging nature, we're also talking about people harming other people. And so we can think about the relationships among people as having something to do with how much damage and when that damage occurs or doesn't occur. So whenever we encounter a case of environmental degradation, be it pollution or natural resource depletion, we can ask ourselves three basic questions. The first is, who is it who benefits from these activities that degrade the environment? If no one was benefiting, they wouldn't be happening. The second is, who's harmed by these activities? If nobody's being harmed, it wouldn't be a problem, at least from the standpoint of human well-being. And thirdly, why is it that those who benefit from these environmentally harmful activities are able to impose these costs on others?
I've got children. I've got 21, 23-year-old children. And what's their future with you people with money? You talk about money all of the time.
Okay, sit down, please.
On same-sex marriage, the issue seems clear to me. If two people want to marry each other, why shouldn't they? Regardless of their gender. Why should the state or the church or anybody stand in their way? I'm for same-sex marriage. But if we go to the barricades over this issue, to the exclusion of so much else, let us first examine the institutions of marriage and its relationship to property rights, to capitalism itself. Let us think about the emphasis we place on bourgeois acceptability, on abiding by society's rules, rather than, as Oscar Wilde put it, understanding that man's greatest virtue is his disobedience. I'd like to leave this question with you. Have we not lost a sense of proportion? Last week, Professor Will Stephan of the ANU Climate Change Institute warned that we are fast approaching the time when it will be too late to reverse our willful heating of the earth, perhaps the greatest crime of all. This is our issue, your issue. It's a people's issue, like war and poverty and injustice. In other words, if we want to change the world, if we want to save it from ruthless, violent power,